Annie, thanks so much for carving out the time to be with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Eric.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Now, you've got a really interesting background. I'm curious to hear sort of what your journey looks like and really what inspired you to work exclusively with cannabis brands.
It's definitely something that has been on my mind for many, many years before I actually took the plunge to work in this industry. And the plant has been monumentally helpful to me personally in managing anxiety and stress and insomnia, things that tend to plague many a type A personality. And I've found as I've become more open with my own personal cannabis use, I find many other high achieving professionals who also have turned to cannabis, but have been closeted about it until fairly recently. So cannabis has always been a personal interest and passion for me. And then I worked in another emerging industry, or at the time it was emerging. I worked in clean tech and renewable energy, and so developed really an expertise in marketing and positioning new and emerging products and services that took on and challenged traditional incumbents. So in the case of cannabis, positioning cannabis as an alternative to opioids, tobacco, alcohol, and other potentially harmful, more harmful substances. When Prop 64 passed in California and cannabis was legal for both medical and adult use, I decided to get off the sidelines and jump into this industry, and I really haven't looked back. So that's how I came to work in cannabis.
You've done some particularly intriguing work in this world of ESG, of environmental, social, and corporate governance. And these things, like corporate social responsibility, are very commonplace table stakes in the outside world, if you will. Probably a little bit more net new inside of cannabis. So I'm really interested to hear your take on the relationship between ESG and company culture, particularly in emerging markets.
In the early days, back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, when corporate social responsibility and sustainability were just kind of becoming buzzwords and becoming like a emerging focal point for corporations, these activities and initiatives were really seen as oftentimes as cost centers, and initiatives that like maybe a company would take on once they kind of had solidified and shored up like their core business. So once you're profitable and you're making money and everybody's happy in your company, like then you can look at corporate social responsibility, then you can look at sustainability. And I think as the movement around corporate responsibility has evolved, and we've evolved to looking at ESG, environmental, social, and governance, we are now able to really look at like individual drivers of social environmental impact. I think when you look at company culture and ESG in that lens, so specifically around governance, and around corporate governance, but also around how we treat and manage our employees inside our organizations, we can look at a couple of different metrics, one of which is talent attraction, especially like millennials and Gen Zers increasingly seeking to work for companies that exhibit strong values in terms of their community involvement, strong values in terms of how they treat their workers, and in terms of how they're like stewarding their environmental impact on the planet. So certainly like can use ESG as a driver for talent attraction, but I think even more so is really can be a firm driver of talent retention.
Annie, I think it's a foregone conclusion at this point that diversity and corporate social responsibility lead to ROI. That the data shows that, and it seems like ESG leads to the same place from an external perspective. What have you seen companies do from an internal standpoint, shifting as it's a candidates market today? People move around a lot, especially within cannabis. How are you seeing ESG play out in the cannabis space today to keep the workforce happy, healthy, engaged, and most importantly, retained?
One thing specifically that we are beginning to see in cannabis that is table stakes in most other industries are kind of support and affinity groups for individuals within these companies to connect with and feel allyship with fellow employees in kind of similar in similar life stages, place and time, culturally. So, employee resource groups, for instance, women's groups to support, women inside these organizations. I just am in the process personally of organizing a group of senior marketing executives from across cannabis that are female to meet on a monthly basis so that we can support one another as peers, but also share resources, share knowledge and best practices, specifically as a way to help retain senior level women in these roles, because it's a challenging industry for many reasons. And I think that as marketers, we all, we have shared challenges. As women, we have shared challenges. And the idea of creating like support and camaraderie amongst, competitors who can also cooperate can go a long way. So
you're a fund advisor in West Creek Investments, which must be very, very exciting, because you get to have an interesting and valuable vantage point into the marketplace and sort of how very early stage companies are thinking about going to market. What does it look like? Can you paint us a picture of what an ideal model looks like with respect to having both an investing arm as well as an operating arm to add value and ultimately de-risk portfolio holdings?
This is a topic about which I'm personally very passionate, having come from traditional CPG and natural products, where there was a strong presence of venture capital and private equity in terms of like growth capital, but also in terms of operational support and resourcing, especially for companies in the emerging industries in which I participated previously, like renewable energy and sustainable packaging, that these were, new technologies taking on, as I mentioned earlier, these incumbents, and the importance of scaling and resourcing effectively to most efficiently utilize funds in our growth. One of the things that was most helpful when I was a part of those companies was like a network of advisors and consultants that could help us to not reinvent the wheel, to learn from best practices from these incumbent industries that we were taking on, and also scale in a resource effective way where we weren't having to hire a number of full-time executive roles in order to gain that level of expertise in our organization. 5 years ago, we're not many experienced operators. Now, 2022, after, the experience of folks who have worked in Colorado and California and Washington, we are beginning to have experienced professionals across cultivation, manufacturing, tech, marketing, what have you. And my personal hypothesis is that combining growth capital with a network of strong operating partners to de-risk portfolio investments, but also create synergies between them, is one way to really accelerate growth in this industry, and especially growth of I would say independent operators, independent plant touching operators that are not already like connected to any of the more like well-capitalized MSOs.
And from a VC perspective, when you're vetting companies, how do you think about ESG from a team standpoint? Because to your point, individuals are leveling up. You have more qualified talent today, more specialized talent today in cannabis than ever before. But from a team standpoint, what are you looking for? And if you don't see what you're looking for, how do you coach stakeholders to really level up their talent at both the individual and team level so that they can maximize future state ESG?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I definitely look for diversity. And when I talk about diversity, it is not just, race, gender, but also kind of levels of experience and from where the entrepreneurs have come, but also teams of advisors, as well as potential future hires for that team. So certainly I see a strong value in diversity. And I also, I don't believe that, one has to necessarily represent like the customer or consumer, segment or audience that your business is going after. But I do think having at least a lens within your team, let's say you're a brand or a product or service that it purports to target, seniors let's say, having some, lens within your team of somebody who, is over 55 and maybe like represents that consumer group might be useful. So I think definitely having that degree of diversity is important.
So if you could give one piece of advice to growing cannabis companies today that are potentially looking to raise capital, what would you tell them to be thinking about in terms of how to keep your people? From a retention standpoint, how would you want to start with the end in mind? So now that they're at the beginning stages, what's the one piece of advice you would give them to maximize employee retention?
I think I would suggest that as early on as possible, they bring a team member into their fold that has a strong track record of building teams and prioritizing people and culture, not just a recruiter. You can use ForceBrands for that, but somebody who can be inside your organization day to day, setting up programs that can retain your employees through having strong offerings in terms of HR support, affinity groups, community involvement, et cetera. I think what I see oftentimes in cannabis is absent a dedicated people and culture lead, the responsibility for kind of maintaining team morale tends to fall disproportionately on people managers, on the line managers who are also responsible for doing their day job. So, I've been in positions myself where I was, in charge of marketing for, an entire, cannabis house of brands. And yet I also was the only person really looking out for, the well-being and the best interest of my people and my team, because I didn't have a strong human resources partner in the organization. So I think that oftentimes kind of similar to ESG initiatives, having people and culture leads within organizations is seen as an afterthought or something that you can do once your team is built. So you're going to focus on recruiting first, and then we're going to bring in somebody who is an HR generalist or really a people and culture lead. And I think there's, a clear difference between the skill sets of somebody who is great at sourcing and somebody who is great at, culture and team, morale building.
From a what's best for employees and culture and ESG standpoint, are you most excited about federal legalization happening, or do you think a state-by-state model would actually serve the evolution of company culture in cannabis?
It's a great question. So I think from a sustainability perspective, in terms of environmental sustainability, I think federal legalization will be beneficial because we will be able to produce cannabis and manufacture it in the regions where it is least costly and least environmentally, hopefully, therefore least environmentally harmful. So for instance, be able to grow cannabis in states like Colorado and California, New Mexico, Arizona, and export it to other parts of the country, as well as, and then kind of enabling regions to focus on what they do best. But I don't think from, it's interesting then from a social standpoint, that will potentially result in the loss of, jobs that are currently existing in every state that has legal cannabis around cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution. So I think there's pluses and minuses to both. One fear I do have with regard to federal legalization and the influx of institutional capital is the kind of overtaking of independent operators and small business by like large corporate conglomerates from, that are not yet playing in cannabis, let's say like tobacco, alcohol, et cetera, pharma, big pharma. So I think that's one reason why we have this, unique opportunity and this like limited window of time right now to try and build and structure like strong, resilient corporations within cannabis that can withstand the pressures that are going to come in when legalization happens.
Annie, I always enjoy connecting. It's always an absolute pleasure. And I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for the time and your perspective and expertise that you shared with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Eric. It's always a pleasure with you as well.